You're listening to The Donor Doctor Show, where your host, James Newberry, will help you improve the health of your fundraising. Now over to James.
Hello, this is The Donor Doctor here again, and I'm with my friend Stuart McLean. You've been asked back again. I understand your daughter apparently listens to the podcast. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was able to finally impress my 18-year-old daughter. She's a senior in high school, and I'm talking to her on the phone because she attends a boarding school. And I said, you know, your father was featured in a podcast. And her ears perked up, and she said, really? She says, I want to listen to this. And I thought, my goodness. She not only knew what a podcast was, but she was impressed that her own father is on one.
Well, that's great. Interestingly, I got I have been getting some comments about the podcast, and one of them came from an artist, quite talented, named Andy Hall. And he says, why don't you talk about design more? And if he means the look of the package, I totally agree that one carrier does 2 or 3 times better than another. This is not unusual at all. I could tell you several instances. So the look of the package, it matters a lot. It doesn't necessarily mean that the most attractive package, physically attractive, is the best, though. To quote Eugene Schwartz, the ugly thing in a world of beauty stands out. And I think of our late colleague, Wendy Newman. At her memorial service, they took some of her packages. Well, they're not physically attractive because they often were for animal sanctuaries, not all of them. And they were, homespun. And homespun is not going to look slick, if you will. The smile train, you think of that. What sells there? It's the picture of the girl with the
harelip.
Yes, I mean, and you think, geez, what is that like to go through life like that? And for a relatively small amount of money, I can change her life. So you take that picture away, smile train is not nearly as effective. I think of animal groups too often. The teaser can matter, the design and stuff like that, but there's certain pictures, certain graphic images that are really powerful. In that sense, I definitely believe. I like size. I mean, I know you do too. I mean, the bigger package stands out as well. I had an interesting test one time. We did a gold foil, which is expensive, so we gang run it with the prospect, the house and the prospect. Well, we used too much up in the prospect, and we only had the file was 15,000, so I had 8,000 of the gold foil, and the 7,000 went with the same package, but one had gold foil carrier, the other just a smooth carrier, and it did 2.5 times better. No other difference. So yes, the look of the package, of course, that's flattery. You're saying that's personal. You're saying you're important. People are attracted to gold. They're attracted to. Where I also think it's very important is calendar. I've seen calendars that are nice do much better than calendars that are crummy. Certificates or rewards that are nice do better ones that are crummy. If it's something, a hat or a back-end premium that is desirable does a lot better than one that's crummy as well. Mm-hmm. So I definitely agree with them. The look of the package or the design matters. I'm not always convinced that the graphic artist pays for itself. I'm reminded of the package I once did for the Norman Rockwell Museum. We had a colleague there, Chris, said it was the best looking package he ever did. I wasn't the one that designed it, okay, so I'm not taking credit. It didn't do well, though. So, a good graphics won't cover up a weak ask for money, week offer, that kind of thing. That's all I'm saying. So I do think the design is very important.
Yeah, you covered a lot of ground there. I would say, to your point, you can have a great direct mail carrier, kind of like being like a great Christmas gift. Beautiful wrap job, beautiful ribbon on it, and you open it up and you're disappointed. And I think a lot of times graphics are something that people says, oh, this looks professional, when what they really need is to being able to convey a message.
Right.
And sometimes having a picture is the right thing on the outside, even if it's a black and white.
Right.
I remember we did some work for George Washington's Mount Vernon, and the direct mail campaign was successful in acquisition. But they said, we'd really like you to have your graphics look more like our membership program. And they showed us a sample of their number 10 membership envelope. It was beautiful, beautiful work, well designed. We tried something like that for the acquisition, and it just was miserable.
Interesting.
And what drove the acquisition was headline on the carrier, and also a George Washington quarter showing through.
The quarter was a popular, yes.
Yes,
Yeah, okay.
And the quarter made a point on the inside. And anyway, I've really found that you have to be careful with graphics, because it's not all the graphics, it's the format. You mentioned certificates and a nice-looking certificate. I've actually spent more money on a package to frame the certificate.
Sure.
And we got a beautiful matte cardboard textured frame that somebody could either put on their wall, or they could punch out a little stand in the back and put it on a bookshelf or their desk.
Right.
And I split test the two with 3 different clients. And because we had the frame, there was value added. And I think I would expand on the art idea to say that you need to add value to the package. And the real purpose of graphics is to enhance the message. And you have to have a format and art, perhaps, that adds value.
I would agree with that. Well, now to our main part. I got this idea from you when we were talking about postmortems, how you should review a package for the results, and not just your disasters.
Right.
I mean, the ones that underperform are useful. And I would happen to be reading aviation history, and Captain Sullenberger, the hero of the Hudson. I don't know if you know this. I wrote a letter for him, but it never mailed, though. You probably had some of those before. They changed their mind. Yeah, even more than one. But he talked about how aviation in the United States is so much safer, particularly with the big airliners, because they study history. They study, what happened with, this crash or that crash, and they learn. A lot of times agencies or nonprofits, they don't make the same decision. Maybe that one person knows, but when they leave, the next person, doesn't know it, particularly if it's not something that almost forces them out of business, that kind of thing. So anyway, I was thinking, I've been reading about airline crashes, and a lot of them are from miscommunication. I mean, there's the one that's kind of famous is Korean airliners, that they used to be 21 times more likely to have a crash in a Korean airline per mile than others, and it was because the co-pilots, they would bow to the pilot, and you could be crashing into, and this actually happened, into Hong Kong, and the co-pilot was saying things and the captain was ignoring them. But this is actually more common than you think as far as ignoring. There's been other accidents where they ran out of fuel, and the pilot, he says to the air traffic controller, "Hey, I need," but he doesn't make it urgent enough. He doesn't make it clear, and so now they know what to do to say, "Hey, this is really serious." And I think we should do that in our own business. What I'm saying is, if airline safety has become so much better, why not we take these same principles? And I'm reminded of an experiment that we did when we were working together, where everybody put their worst piece of copy and exchanged it with somebody else to get their view on it. You remember that episode?
Thanks for bringing that up, Jim.
Well, mine was the curse of expertise, which is a common one. When you become an expert in something, you become worse at explaining it.
Uh-huh.
And I became so knowledgeable on the Cloud, the Mustang of the prior mountains, that in this new mailing I didn't explain it as well as when I was learning it. And I just noticed it. I didn't have somebody else read it. That was a common one. The person I read kind of made the mistake of mailing on an issue where the group couldn't have any impact anymore, and it kind of faded. It was on the tail end of it. I remember you made one where you kind of rushed it. You were told, kind of put pressure to finish the job, and there was another one. And this is why it probably was discontinued. But she was kind of harsh. She said, "Oh, there was no." It was read like a travel brochure, that kind of thing. So it takes an openness to take criticism. Not everybody does that, of course. And in an airline thing, a lot of times it is the pilot error. So it is a difficult thing to. A lot of people want to avoid that.
Well, I've always respected people who were willing to be lifetime students, and you learn from your successes as well as your failures. I was taught when I first came into this business that your letter was either going to have a high percentage of response and a low average gift, or it's going to have a high average gift and a low percentage of response.
Right.
Through testing and then learning from the test and building on the tests with that knowledge, I was able to find out that wasn't true.
Interesting.
I was also you can get a high average gift and a high response rate. I've also been in a situation where, people are trying, it's like, oh, we got to shave a penny off here and a half a cent off there, and we'll get it printed over there, and then we'll send it to them over there for this, and then back to the letter shop. It's exhausting. I went in the other direction. I'll spend more money to make something compelling. And I've had normal acquisition, not a high dollar mailing, but 10 years ago I did something where it was over $1.50 in the mail for acquisition.
Wow.
And the company chief financial officer called my boss while I happened to be in her office right after it got on the internal system, intranet, and he said, "Is this true?" I could tell from her responses and what his questions were. And I knew, boy, they're going to fry my bacon if this doesn't work. Because I was 3 times what you're supposed to pay for an acquisition.
That's right.
And but the fact of the matter is, the 100,000 test was no fluke. It worked, and it net money.
Well, it stood out. I mean, that's important. It stood out.
Well, that's just, when
among other things.
You do your post-mortems.
Stood out. It had a great involvement.
I don't want to, well, thank you. I don't want to spend more than I have to. Yeah, I'll save a penny if I can, or 2 cents. But what we're really offer here is not the cost per package. It's the cost to raise $1.
Yeah.
And that's where people make mistakes. If you want to avoid crashes, keep in mind that you're trying to lower the cost to raise $1, not necessarily the cost per package.
Well, I agree with you on that. I did come up with some of the things, and maybe this will help other people. One of the things is sloppiness, and I'll never forget one time it was a production coordinator, they copied the disclaimers but changed them around, and it was there were another group, and they got sued and stuff like that. So sloppiness is a big one, where people don't prove something. This one could have lost the client. Fortunately, they were pretty cool about it, but it was a big error. I came up with another one, is not foreseeing what could go wrong, or not having clear instructions, being able to confuse. I was thinking of our colleague Chris. He was doing mail for 2 state parties, and the mail was exactly the same in different states, obviously, but the same color, and the mail shop switched the reply envelope.
Oh no!
Now, I'm not saying it was his fault, but it was an easy mistake to make. Sometimes you have to think about that. Maybe he should have altered when they mailed it, or I don't know. It's not his fault, but he made it maybe easier to make that mistake than...
Yeah, maybe he gang running them was fine at the printer, but they should have delivered to 2 different mail shops.
Maybe so, something.
Or maybe he should have gotten a setup sample for each one of them so they could look at it before they did the insertion.
Certainly, he should have called them up, make sure you get the right one. I don't know, but that one forced him out of business. I mean, that's a crash, right?
I would say so.
Yeah. Corruption. We don't think of, because most people are honest because they want your repeat business, right? They make more money that way. But I know of a vendor that you give them a postage check. You give it because you don't know the exact amount, so you often pay the mail shop. You write the check out to them, and then they write a check to the post office. Well, this person was mailing some, and then would use some for his own money because he was short of money, and then so he'd mail it later. And some would mail after, like, Veterans Day or whatever the holiday it was attached to the mailing, so it was like a disaster. And, of course, it was a crime, but it doesn't do you any good if he goes to jail or whatever. Falsifying Form 3602. It doesn't happen that often, but people do.
I've seen it happen.
It happens. And if you're in the business long enough, it's going to happen to you. You got to be prepared. Sort of like as a poker player, you got to know that occasionally you're going to run across somebody who tries to cheat you. You need to be prepared. It's not, you need to be looking for the signs of what's an anomaly. How can this happen? It's just something to be aware of. This next one's a big one. Is we're so big into testing. We'll test 40,000 and then we'll roll out to 200,000, whatever it is. Sometimes the environment shifts, and your previous mailing, which did real well, netted money on, say, 100,000, and then they'll roll out to 500,000, but something's shifted. This is particularly true in politics, political candidates. Hillary Clinton was presumed to be the nominee in 2008, but she wasn't. Or the race is close and then it becomes a blowout, these kind of things. And this has happened and people have lost a lot of money. It's just not affecting,
Well, I remember when you talk about a paradigm shift, I remember putting out an appeal for the Reagan Presidential Library years ago. And that appeal landed in people's mailboxes the very week that President Reagan passed on.
Well, that was a good shift.
Well, it was a good shift.
For fundraising, yeah.
It was a good shift. The 100,000 piece test, I think, net $100,000, and this was just to, regular $25, $40 names,
right.
$10 names. We were very excited, but that the test did well. And I looked at the results and I said, well, certainly Reagan getting all that attention, just as people were getting in the news, just as people were getting the appeal, this gave them an emotional outlet for their grief
Sure.
to pay tribute to him.
Right.
If they liked him as president, we used the right lists. And I looked at it and I said, are we going to have fallout if we roll out? And falling down in response. And I looked at it and I said, you know what, we probably will, but even if it is cut in half, we will still mail at break even or a profit.
Right.
Well, guess what?
We
did not. It was miserable. We lost money on the second phase.
Okay.
So what I should have done was retest.
Retest, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's a good example. The next one is, Claude Hopkins. He was talking about advertising agencies. He thinks there's just they just improve over time because they have all the test results, and so you build upon things. Well, what happens if the people that were the veterans leave though? And they don't share these numbers, or people compartmentalize a lot of the smaller things. The big things people know. So not sharing test results or learning from test results, I consider a big error.
But some agencies don't have that culture.
Well, I guess you're right.
And I've
nonprofits as well.
I've worked at places where they pit the account executives, copywriters against one another, thinking that that's going to make things better. There's internal competition. And what happens is people, I have found, don't share what works. They hope it goes unnoticed.
Zero sum, kind of like if
yes.
I don't want to give my...
if I don't get... I remember somebody in particular who I thought had something to share, and no matter what we tried to do, she wouldn't share it. She would always talk around the subject in any meeting, and so I finally gave up. She just wasn't going to divulge.
Well, it doesn't matter. You can read their packages.
Yeah, but for the inexperienced people, they don't know what to look for.
That's true. Yeah, you're right. In other words, they read it and they don't get it. They don't absorb it. Yeah. I mean, there's things like, I give you an example. I once mailed a coin for a political advocacy group. That's typically work real well for charity, a coin, a nickel or something, or 2 nickels. They tend to work for charities better than they do for a political organization. You know that, right?
I've seen the charities use them more than political groups, but I kind of think that political groups haven't experimented enough with them. So perhaps. I'm not going to accept that as
okay. Well, I did one, and the person said, "Well, don't you know?" I said, "No, nobody told me. I noticed it hadn't been tried, but that's something you often do, is trying something for one group to another." But this next crash shows you that's a risky proposition, because sometimes something works in one area and doesn't work. And that's my next one, is misapplying something that works from one niche to another. And I'm thinking about when I was in the 80s, they had something called Who's Who Among American Conservatives. Did you ever hear about that?
Yeah.
And it was a failure. And And I know why, because I read the comment mail. So I actually went down and read the comment mail. And I remember this one lady, because she was from the town I was born in, Lawton, Oklahoma. And she said, "Listen, I just give because it's the right thing to do." Religious lady, she just, I don't want any recognition. I've been blessed, and I just want what's best for this country. I mean, it was, and so... Who's who among, maybe that would work for people giving to museums, I'm not sure. People do like recognition, so it's not a crazy idea. It's not why people give to political organizations, generally. Maybe they give, 5 major gifts to get their photos with somebody. I'm not talking about that, but people don't give $25 for recognition. They give because they care about an issue, or they're angry about an issue, whatever it is. That's why they give. I'll give another example. Was for your old client you talked about at Mount Vernon, they had success mailing one of these high-end packages that had like a DVD and that kind of stuff. Well, people giving to a historic site like that are giving to that site because they care about that, right?
Yeah.
And that was tried for a troop support group. And it didn't lose money, but it had a huge opportunity cost, because they normally were making like $200,000 and they made $20,000 instead. And people really aren't giving to the troop. It's just a vehicle to give to the soldiers. That's what they're giving to. That was the reason why it was a misapplication.
Well, I think in light of that and things that I've experienced, there's institutionally loyal donors.
Right.
And they're loyal to a mission, for example, the Reagan Library, preserving Reagan's legacy, his political outlook. And then you've got more hot-button-ish things. It's kind of like when you talk about marketing at a grocery store. They keep all the gum and the People magazine and everything at the checkout.
Right, that's an impulse buy.
Exactly, and I think there's impulse gives. I'm going to give to the troops. It's Veterans Day coming up. And I'm not doing anything to show my respect to them, so I'm going to give $25.
Right.
That's different than giving to the Reagan Presidential Library, which has more of a sense of permanence to it, and it's an institution, and there's an ideology behind it. And so I think one is quite impulse, like you said, and the other is much more of maybe some emotion behind it, but it's kind of a cerebral give, and the emotion, if anything, is about preservation, a legacy. that sort of thing. And I think those are two different kinds of donors.
Now, you may not know this, but I recently met with Jim Menerick, your mentor.
Yeah.
He says hi, by the way.
Oh, thank you, Jim, and Jim for saying.
He gave me some advice, and one of the things he said was interesting. Even in a prospect package, you may end up "Dear Ragged Admirer," or whatever that is, but as your greeting. But he would say, "Dear Stuart." He would start off thinking he's writing to one person, and for one of the groups you mentioned. I always think of my grandmother, who loved history and was very proud of her history. And when I saw this package, it wasn't one you did, but it's a mistake that you wouldn't make if you know who you're writing to. And I'm talking about a package that had gum, which I know was very successful for a troop support group, but you used it for a historic site. And I didn't find it funny because I knew right away who your market was. It wasn't humorous to me. It was something like, would George Washington chew this gum?
Yeah, I didn't write that.
Well, no, you didn't. But
let's make it clear right now.
Okay, but I understand. But my point, I'm just trying to learn from the mistake. If you really understood your market, Grandmother Patty would not found that funny. I mean, it's not funny. I mean, I'm not saying you should worship George Washington, but if you revere him, it's not humorous, and it's kind of a turnoff to your audience, and it didn't work. So it's not. But I knew right away. I was like that. I said, "Oh no, that's not appropriate," because I knew who my audience was. When I write in a museum, I know people like this. Whatever I write to something, I think of, okay, I've met somebody who loves animals or loves American history or whatever it is. You have to think of that person, and would they find that suitable? Related to this is sometimes people write a package, you're ghostwriting. You're not putting it in the voice of the client, the voice of the signer. I'm sure you've seen that. And I think the worst example of this was, it was so bad they didn't mail his letter. This guy, I had interviewed with him. He was an advertising guy, and he didn't offer me a job. But years later, he had some good contact, and he asked me to help him. And so we met in. This is old Paul Weyrich back in the day. You remember?
Oh
him?
Yeah.
And he was influential, really informing the religious right. He was a Melkite. Are you familiar with that? It's like a Eastern Rite Catholic church, but he was influential in getting people like, Jerry Falwell and other people involved in politics. But he was an intellectual himself. He was not. So this guy writes this hardcore package that was like with language that Paul Weyrich would never, and he doesn't know his market, and so they didn't mail his. They mailed mine. Mine would have worked, but this guy also did advertising discount. Are you familiar with it? Advertisers, and they make their money by a 15% markup, which most direct mail guys don't do. And I told him not to do it. We talk about lifetime value, like of a donor. Well, I think there's a lifetime value of a relationship, and you're not really looking to make money on the first mailing. You know what I mean? You're looking to make money on subsequent mailings. So he sunk himself by. He did bring me in, so we did get one mailing off, and we could have had more, but he paid, but they weren't happy about it, and I wasn't happy about it either. I kind of felt like I did mention it. He was in charge. I always felt dirty about it. I thought it was. I'm not saying unethical, but it wasn't normal. But he made two mistakes. One was being greedy, and the other was not being in the voice of the client, of the signer. Have you ever had that happen where people just don't get to know the signer and they just try to write?
Oh my goodness! I'll give you the most horrifying example of my career.
Okay.
And it was in the first 2 years of my career, and I had just come over from another agency, and I went to a different agency because I thought there was going to be more chance for experience and advancement. And one of the first things they did was they pushed a direct mail fundraising appeal in front of me on the table, and they said, we tried to get somebody else to sign this letter, but they wouldn't do it. Put it in front of your new client and get them to sign it. And I looked at the letter, and I'm thinking to myself, what do I do here? Because it wasn't good. And all they wanted me to do was change the name at the end of who's signing it and put a different letterhead on it.
Oh, I hate that.
Now, that should be an early warning that you are not doing your job as an agency and not using the signer and not understanding the signer and their voice and what's important to them. As time went on, the coming week or so, I found out that this particular appeal had made the rounds with 5 or 6 other organizations before they put it in front of me. Now, shame on my agency for putting it in front of me, the new guy, because they didn't want to spend time writing another appeal. So to them, it was just cookie cutter. Just put somebody else's name as the signer and a different letterhead on it and mail it.
Oh, that's disappointing.
It was very disappointing, especially for me starting at that agency. It was very disillusioning, and I'm just a young buck fairly out of college.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, businesses behave like this?
Mm.
Shame on them.
That's right. Well, I have one last one. And this isn't a bad idea, but you have to be in tune with what your client is comfortable with. You know what I'm saying? It could
my goodness.
And I was thinking
yes.
about one package, you mailed a dollar bill, which is obviously a great technique, results-wise. But this particular client got such grief, you got reprimanded for it, and you could have potentially lost the account. If you do something that's totally out of the values, you have to kind of feel for what they're interested in.
I'm not a perfect decider of these things, so let it be clear, but I was pressured into doing that by my employer.
Okay.
And I didn't want to do it. I said, this does not reflect the client. We are very successful in doing what we're doing, and we're expanding what we're doing, and they're comfortable with their program because, yes, they have a certain image that they're trying to put out there.
Right.
A certain dignity.
Right.
And it was one of the largest clients of the agency. It was one of the flagships of the agency, and extremely successful direct mail program. And not everything worked, but we kept testing, and we're expanding our boundaries, and we have a number of things working. And I won't say it's not to leave well enough alone, because we are trying new things, but it was within that framework of what they're comfortable with and their dignity and the respect that they thought people should give them as an organization. And I don't want to say who it is because I don't want anybody to feel bad who listens
But it was
to this podcast.
it was a major museum, and it was a famous person came to them and objected to it.
And they were embarrassed. It was the kind of person who knew people on the board of directors, kind of a high roller. And the client came back and said to me, we don't care how much money this makes. We never want to do it again. We were embarrassed. And
not a huge, the person who recommended that, they're trying to make the most money. That's where people like Claude Hopkins and others, I think, may be a little bit wrong for fundraising, the results aren't the only thing that matter.
That's
because
right.
you have concerns. The client has the concerns about the reputation. Maybe you say it matters 80 or 90%.
But I would say that's part of the results.
Well, you could argue that, but it's not just the money raised, because the way it's done, if it causes them backlash, they're sensitive about that. You have to kind of understand that, and it's an easy mistake to make. There's always the conflict about what works and what they feel comfortable with.
That said, something like George Washington's Mount Vernon, because George Washington's on the dollar bill,
right?
I think you could mail and have the dollar bill for George Washington as a technique and have it do quite well.
Right.
And they don't get because
he's on there.
Yeah. And we have something that's related to that in the copy, in the message.
I'm a big fan of dollar bill mailings. What I found is sometimes clients resist, and you just wait. You know, you don't push them. And most come around to it.
Well, I just have a problem with this cookie cutterness. I know of somebody who lost a client not too long ago because they were pushing him to try a technique and pushing him in, and the client said, "We don't want to do this," and the answer from the agency was, "Well, that's how it's done."
You got to listen to them.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't want to order a steak at a restaurant and have them tell me, "Well, this is how it's done. You get it medium rare, whether you want it that way or not."
Right. But this person didn't think anything of
no.
doing that for the other one. And
we have to remember, we're not the boss.
Right.
We're consultants. And it's hard when you're trying to lead somebody and they don't necessarily want to follow your advice. And you have to be sensitive to that, and maybe you can convince them to do something as long as it's not outside of their identity and what they think they should be portraying themselves as. And you can do a little test, and then you can show them numbers. Just don't crow if you win. And guide people and see yourself. I always like to tell people that my clients, that I am a behind-the-scenes junior partner in their success.
Have you ever had a client where you did a test and they still, and your side wins, and they still want to do their side, the losing side?
Yes.
I've seen that done.
You know, one of my colleagues working a door over in his office, they launched a client, and there were two tests that went out. Both made money in acquisition, and the one that cost more per package is what the agency recommended rolling out because it had a lower cost to raise $1.
But he just saw the cost.
The client, it turned out, in his regular job was an accountant.
Right.
And I want to roll the other one because it costs less. Well, actually, it doesn't cost less, Mr. Client. Do you understand the difference between cost to raise $1 and cost per package? Yes, I do. Oh, so you want to roll the one that we're recommending, the one that's lower to cost to raise $1? No, I want to mail the one that's cost per package lower. He didn't get it. So what do you do if you're the agency? You've explained it to him patiently, and he's got what is in his mind, what he wants to do. You know, it's not going to kill the program if you do what he wants to do, but it wasn't in his best interest.
Right.
It was still in his interest to roll it, but it wasn't in his best interest.
Well, very good. Stuart, I've taken enough of your time today, but it's good chatting with you again. This is the Donor Doctor Show. Till next time, talk to you later.